Imagine the silence of the Aegean Sea 2,000 years ago. Above the waves, a storm is raging, timber creaks, ropes snap, and a lone wooden ship is swallowed by the dark blue. Down below, in the cold quiet, sand settles over a strange lump of corroded bronze. For 20 centuries it lies there, half stone, half memory, visited only by drifting fish. It looks like debris, a forgotten rock. But inside that rock, hidden beneath layers of green corrosion, there are gears, differential gears. Precision engineering that rivals a Swiss watch, ticking silently in the mud. We are told that history is a straight line. Stone tools, then bronze, then iron, then silicon, always upward, always forward. But that object recovered from the shipwreck, the Antikythera Mechanism, shatters the line completely. It is a computer built in an age when humanity should have barely mastered the wheelbarrow. A machine centuries ahead of its time, whispering that progress is not a ladder we climb, but a wheel that turns. What if we have lived this brilliance before? What if the past is not primitive, but simply forgotten? To understand a machine that defies time, we must step outside of it. Let the ticking of the modern clock fade away. Let the deadlines, the alarms, the artificial urgency dissolve into the deep. There is no rush here, only the slow, rhythmic pulse of the ancient sea. Sink down with me into the quiet depths, and let us study the rust, the ruin, and the secret it has guarded for 2,000 years. We stand before a paradox that stretches across the entire history of humanity. The belief that ancient must mean primitive. It is one of the quiet biases woven into the modern mind. We picture our ancestors as fumbling in the dark, learning slowly, step by cautious step, until finally emerging into the light of reason and engineering. We imagine the past as a long corridor of dim candlelight leading to the brilliance of today. But what if that corridor is not a straight line? What if it bends, collapses, and restarts? What if the light flickers on and off across the ages? The first obstacle in understanding the Antikythera Mechanism and every so-called impossible artifact is not technical. It is psychological. It is our assumption that we are the apex of human capability simply because we exist in the present. We confuse chronology with intelligence and date with difficulty. We think, if it's old, it must be simple. But history does not care about our assumptions. History leaves clues rusted, fractured, half-buried clues that do not fit the clean diagrams in our textbooks. This is the great tension. The further back we look, the fewer pieces we have. The past is not a complete tapestry. It is more like a tapestry burned in a great fire, with only charred fragments remaining. And yet we insist on describing the entire picture from the few threads that survived. Imagine walking into a vast library, but finding that almost every book has turned to ash. Only 3 pages remain. 3 pages from different volumes, written by different hands, separated by centuries. And from these 3 pages, we try to reconstruct the entire history of human knowledge. We draw timelines, we chart progress, we make confident declarations about what people once knew and what they couldn't possibly have known. But our timeline is not a record, it is a guess built from ruins. This is the immense obstacle, the illusion of linear progress. The belief that human civilization moves forward like a well-disciplined parade, step after steady step. But real history is nothing like a parade. It is a storm. Empires rise and fall. Libraries burn. Languages vanish. Knowledge blooms, flourishes, and then disappears for centuries. The seeds of genius sprout unexpectedly, and just as unexpectedly, they die. The wheel of history does not spin upward. It simply spins. And so we return to that lump of corroded bronze on the seafloor, an object that should not exist according to our 3 surviving pages. A device that reveals a level of mathematical and mechanical sophistication we did not expect to find in the ancient world. It is not the first anomaly, nor the last, but it is the one that forces us to confront the library of ash. It demands that we admit how much has been lost. The truth is simple, unsettling, and strangely beautiful. Humanity is not climbing a staircase of progress. Humanity is wandering through cycles of brilliance and forgetting. Our ancestors were not crude prototypes of ourselves. They were people capable of insight, creativity, craftsmanship, and innovation equal to any modern mind. What they lacked were the chains of survival, the precariousness of fire, famine, war, and empire. What they built could vanish in a single generation. And here lies the deeper challenge. When we look at an artifact that seems impossible, we are not just confronting a piece of ancient engineering. We are confronting our own arrogance. We are confronting the possibility that the timeline we cling to is only a shadow of a far more complex story. We are confronting a humbling truth. We are not the first age of genius. We are simply the first age with plastic. Once we recognize that our view of history is stitched together from ashes and fragments, a new question rises like a tide. If so much has been lost, how much could have existed? What entire branches of knowledge might have flourished, only to be erased by time, conquest, or catastrophe? And what would those lost chapters have looked like, if even a single artifact like the Antikythera Mechanism escaped oblivion long enough to reach us? When we walk through a modern museum, we see artifacts arranged neatly in glass cases, curated as if the past were orderly. But the truth is that museums contain only the survivor's objects durable enough, lucky enough, or obscure enough to remain untouched. We are not looking at the best of humanity's past. We are looking at its leftovers. The delicate tools, the advanced instruments, the written records detailing how things were made, those are the first to vanish. Wood rots. Papyrus crumbles. Metals are melted and reforged. Knowledge that took generations to build can be undone in a single war, a single invasion, a single moment of desperation. Civilization is not a ladder. It is a sandcastle built on the edge of the tide. And every so often, when the tide recedes just enough, we glimpse shapes beneath the surface shapes that shouldn't be there. A drilled granite core in Egypt with markings that suggest power tools. A Roman chalice that changes color because of embedded nanoparticles. A small clay jar from Parthia that behaves like a battery. These are not hallucinations. They are data points, exceptions that force us to reconsider the rule. But because they do not fit our cherished straight-line narrative, we often push them aside, labeling them anomalies, coincidences, misinterpretations. The historian dismisses them as outliers. The archaeologist places them in a corner of the exhibit. The textbook spares them a paragraph, perhaps a footnote. The illusion of linear progress must be protected, even if the evidence strains against it. The irony is that we, in the modern era, are obsessed with the idea of progress. We expect each decade to surpass the previous one. We speak of innovation as if it were inevitable. We imagine that everything we create will lead to something better, something grander. But history suggests otherwise. History whispers another truth. Progress is fragile, and knowledge is flammable. What if the ancient world experienced cycles of innovation that vanished completely? What if small pockets of advanced technology existed never widespread, perhaps never mass-produced, but real enough to create artifacts that appear impossibly ahead of their age? The world of antiquity was not a unified timeline. It was a patchwork of cultures, each with its own bursts of brilliance. Some innovations may have been guarded secrets. Others may have been the work of singular geniuses whose methods died with them. And some may have been abandoned simply because they were not profitable, convenient, or understood. The Antikythera Mechanism is a perfect example. Whoever built it did not do so by accident. It required centuries of accumulated mathematics, metallurgy, astronomy, and craftsmanship. It was not a novelty. It was the peak of a mountain whose base we can no longer see. Somewhere before this device, there must have been prototypes, workshops, traditions, perhaps even entire schools of mechanical design. Yet none of those survived. The mountain is gone. The peak remains. This is the obstacle we must face before we continue deeper. The understanding that the timeline of human knowledge is not a story of constant ascent, but a series of forgotten heights. We are not looking at a primitive world scattered with miracles. We are looking at a complex world that lost most of its memory. And as we descend further into that forgotten memory, we begin to see a pattern. These impossible artifacts are not isolated wonders. They are echoes. Echoes of techniques, machines, and ideas that must have existed, even briefly, before vanishing into the dark. To truly grasp the weight of these echoes, we must examine the scale of what has been lost, not through speculation, but through the physical reality of time itself. Consider how fragile knowledge is. A scroll can be destroyed by a candle's spark. A tablet can shatter under a single boot. A workshop can be emptied by soldiers in an afternoon. And yet, in modern times, we imagine that knowledge is permanent simply because we store it in the cloud. But if the electricity goes out, if the servers fail, if the backups decay, what remains? How much of our world could be rediscovered from scratch if every digital instruction vanished overnight? The ancients faced that fragility multiplied by thousands. Their tools were manual. Their records were organic. Their cities were vulnerable. Fire was a constant threat. Floods could erase generations. Empires, in their hunger for tribute, melted artifacts to forge new weapons. Conquerors burned libraries, not out of malice alone, but out of indifference. Knowledge was a casualty of survival. And in this relentless churn of creation and destruction, only the strangest, sturdiest, or luckiest objects endured. This is why our timeline is incomplete. Not because the ancients were incapable, but because so little of their genius had the chance to survive. Now imagine this. If all that remained of our own civilization, 10,000 years from now, were a stainless steel fork, a ceramic bowl, and a few fragments of plastic, what would future archaeologists conclude? Would they assume we were primitive because they found no computers, no satellites, no microchips? Or would they guess that those things once existed, but simply did not survive the decay of time? And if those future archaeologists stumbled across a single laptop encased in volcanic ash, would it not seem like an impossible artifact far too advanced for a society represented only by forks and bowls? This is the exact position we are in with the ancient world. We are trying to evaluate an entire civilization from its trash, not its achievements. And occasionally, in that trash, we find a machine that should not be there. A clue that the story is far more complex than the linear narrative suggests. But the greatest misconception about progress is that it cannot move backwards. We assume that once humanity discovers something, electricity, metal alloys, geared mechanisms, that knowledge becomes permanent. Yet the historical record proves otherwise. The recipe for Greek fire has been lost for over a millennium. The formula for Roman concrete disappeared for centuries. The forging techniques behind Damascus steel vanished entirely. These were not mythical. They were real technologies used at scale, then forgotten. If knowledge can be lost within a single millennium, what could be lost within 10 or 20? And more importantly, what does that say about the isolated artifacts that appear impossibly sophisticated for their era? They are not outliers. They are survivors of forgotten golden ages. They are the last sparks from fires that once burned brightly. And this brings us to a fundamental realization. The illusion of linear progress blinds us to the possibility that ancient civilizations reached heights we do not yet fully understand. Not everywhere, not universally, but in pockets, small centers of innovation, led by brilliant individuals and supported by brief windows of stability. Windows that closed long before their knowledge could spread across the world. When those windows closed, history reset, and all that remained were fragments. A gear here, a crystal lens there, a mysterious alloy, a carved stone drilled with impossible precision. We pick up these fragments and forget that they are pieces of larger, vanished worlds. To overcome the immense obstacle, we must learn to see those fragments not as accidents, but as whispers. Whispers from civilizations whose stories were erased not by aliens, not by magic, but by the simple, devastating logic of time. And so, before we venture deeper into the gallery of impossible artifacts, we must confront the final and most humbling truth. We are not looking at the ancient world as it was. We are looking at the ancient world as it survived. A world missing chapters, missing volumes, missing entire civilizations, whose achievements left only the faintest scars on the archaeological record. Imagine walking into a vast library after a fire. The shelves are charred, the air smells of smoke, and only fragments remain, pages torn from their bindings, covers without text, isolated paragraphs floating without context. In this ruined hall, you find one pristine page describing a telescope, another page listing alloys, a third diagramming a complex gear system. You might think these pages were misplaced, or that they belonged to some later era, or that they were fantasies added by mistake. But what if they were not? What if they were all part of the same book one, whose other pages have turned to ash? This is the state of ancient history. We are piecing together a burned library, and the few intact pages frighten us, because they contradict the comforting simplicity of the story we prefer to tell ourselves. We tell ourselves that the ancients were clever, but not too clever, creative, but not too creative. We grant them pyramids and aqueducts, but deny them precision engineering. We allow them mathematics, but not mechanisms. We imagine them brilliant in art, poetry, and philosophy, yet strangely inept at technology, as if human intelligence evolved gradually, as if innovation were a smooth incline rather than a jagged cliff. But intelligence has never been linear. It spikes under pressure. It blossoms under necessity. It flares in the minds of singular individuals whose insights may take centuries to be rediscovered. A lost genius leaves no trace except the tools he builds, and those tools, if made of organic materials, vanish quickly. Only the rarest works survive, the ones crafted from metals, minerals, or stone. And those survivors become the impossible artifacts we marvel at today. If we cling to the illusion of linear progress, these artifacts will always seem like mistakes. If we free ourselves from that illusion, they become evidence. Evidence that humanity has reached advanced local peaks many times only to collapse, reset, and climb again, each time losing a little more of the memory of how it once ascended. And perhaps the most tragic element is that none of this requires fantasy. No ancient aliens, no mythical continents. Only the simple acknowledgement that human knowledge is fragile, and that history is not guaranteed to preserve it. The gears of the Antikythera Mechanism did not appear overnight. They were not a miracle. They were the last echo of a lineage of engineers whose names are lost. The Parthian batteries did not emerge from the void. They were the practical tools of artisans and metallurgists who understood principles that would not reappear for millennia. The impossible drill marks in granite are not magic. They are the fingerprints of techniques we no longer comprehend. The true obstacle, then, is not in the artifacts themselves. It is in us, in our reluctance to accept that the past may have been more complex, more technologically diverse, more astonishing than the comfortable narrative we inherited. We resist the idea because it disrupts the story of our own exceptionalism, because it forces us to confront the possibility that humanity has risen high before and fallen just as far. But once we let go of the illusion, the world transforms. The ruins come alive, the fragments gain meaning. The impossible artifacts cease to be anomalies and become the faint stars of forgotten constellations. Patterns emerge, connections brighten, and we begin to see not a straight line of progress, but a vast, turning wheel. And now, with our illusion set aside, the descent can continue. The water grows colder, The silt rises as we move deeper. The rusted gears await us in the dark. Welcome to the Museum of Anomalies. Let us step now into a different kind of space, not underwater, not in the dust of ruins, but into a museum that exists only in the mind. The doors open without a sound. The air is cool, still, and touched with the faint scent of old paper and polished bronze. This is the Museum of Anomalies, a hall not found on any map, built from the fragments of human history that refuse to fit into the story we tell about ourselves. The lights here are soft, golden, illuminating objects suspended in glass cases that seem to float in the dark. Not the grand artifacts, the statues, the frescoes, the broken columns, but the small things, the overlooked things, the things that scholars mention in footnotes, then move past because they are too inconvenient, too advanced, too strange. Walk with me down the central corridor. The floor echoes lightly beneath our steps. On either side, illuminated niches hold single objects. A shard of glass that behaves like a quantum filter, a cylinder of clay that hums with ancient electricity, a drill core carved into granite with a precision that mocks our assumptions. Each one is a challenge. Each one is a contradiction. Each one asks the same quiet question. How? This museum, of course, is not real. Not physically. No institution on Earth would place these objects together, because doing so would demand rewriting the textbooks. But in truth, they belong together. Not because they share a common origin, most do not, but because they share a common impossibility. They are artifacts that should not exist within the linear model of progress. Yet here they are, enduring, silent, patiently waiting for us to rediscover what they once meant. Notice the atmosphere as we walk. There is no triumph here, no sense of technological arrogance. Instead, there is humility, wonder, a recognition that our ancestors were not primitive minds stumbling through darkness, but thinkers, experimenters, engineers, people as curious and capable as ourselves, working with different tools under different skies. The first gallery on our left houses fragments of mechanisms so corroded they look like sea-worn stones until you notice the teeth of gears, emerging like the skeletons of forgotten machines. The placard reads, "Analog computers, Hellenistic period," but the words feel insufficient, almost timid compared to the audacity of the artifact itself. Across from it stands a simple clay jar, cracked around the rim, its metal components corroded into shades of green and black. A jar that, if filled with vinegar, could produce an electric spark. Next to it, a scrolling light projects microscopic images of its copper and iron interior, as though the museum itself is whispering, "Look closer. Look again." Farther down, at the end of the hall, illuminated by a single beam of white light, rests a granite cylinder, smooth, elegant, perfectly drilled. Grooves spiral around its surface like the thread of a cosmic screw, a reminder that stone remembers what history forgets. These halls are quiet for a reason. They ask us not to marvel at the objects, but to examine the assumptions we brought with us as we entered. Assumptions about what ancient people knew and what they were capable of. This museum forces us to see these artifacts not as isolated curiosities, but as fingerprints of lost engineering traditions, hints of forgotten workshops, echoes of minds who solved problems we didn't know existed in their time. Tonight, we will walk these halls slowly. We will linger at each exhibit. We will let the silence teach us what the textbooks cannot. And in doing so, we will begin a forensic hunt, not for aliens, not for miracles, but for the human brilliance that time buried and circumstance erased. Our journey through the Museum of Anomalies begins here. The divers don't know what they've found yet. Not really. To them, at first, it is only a weight in the dark, a block of encrusted bronze, jagged on one side, oddly smooth on another, as if time had tried to erase it but failed. Salt whirls around the artifact in faint spirals as the divers brush their fingers against its corroded exterior. Their gloves are thick, but even through the material, they can feel pitting, intricate depressions, and raised edges that don't match any natural formation. One diver steadies the floodlight. The beam slices through the underwater haze like a pale spear, illuminating the object fully for the first time. The bronze seems to shimmer, not because it is reflective, but because it carries centuries of stories embedded in its surface. Storms, tides, the weight of silence, the pressure of the abyss. The sea has bitten into it, softened some parts, sharpened others. But nothing, not water, not sand, not time itself, has managed to truly destroy what's hidden inside. The team exchanges glances. In their communication system, the voices crackle strangely. The water distorts everything, even sound. "Get a grip point," one of them murmurs. "Careful, it's fragile. No sudden movements. That thing could disintegrate." They've all seen ancient wrecks before. They've pulled amphorae from the seafloor, iron nails fused into coral, hull fragments petrified into unreadable lumps. But this is different. No one speaks it aloud, but they all feel a strange tension spreading through the water, as if the sea itself is holding its breath. A soft current stirs the sediment around their fins. Tiny organisms swirl like constellations, drifting past the artifact. One diver brushes away a patch of silt and uncovers a pattern, a groove carved into the bronze. It is too precise to be accidental, too deliberate to be the random work of corrosion. He pauses. The groove continues, curving, repeating, forming a circle. Another diver moves in, bringing her helmet closer. Her breath fogs the inside of her visor briefly. "That looks manufactured," she says. But even that word feels insufficient. Manufactured implies a workshop, a hand, a mind, a purpose. Down here, none of that seems possible. Everything is feral, cold, unplanned. Yet the curve in the metal contradicts the entire ocean. The team works slowly, attached to their tethers, adjusting buoyancy as they prepare to lift the object. Sediment erupts in soft billows each time they shift it. At one point, a piece of the incrustation breaks off, drifting upward like a dead leaf. Beneath it, something gleams faintly, a color that should not exist in an object this old, a thin, almost impossibly preserved line of polished bronze. Even after 2,000 years, it catches the light with intent. A shape, a signal, a whisper. One of the divers leans in. Inside the artifact's fractured opening, something metallic flashes. Ridges, teeth, the faint suggestion of motion frozen in metal. His pulse quickens. "Wait." He steadies himself. That's a gear." The word cuts through the static sharply, echoing through every helmet in the team. A gear means machinery. Machinery means engineering. Engineering means planning, precision, an understanding of ratios, forces, motion. Ideas centuries ahead of what anyone believes the ancient world could have produced. But the gear in front of them isn't crude or primitive. It is intricate, fine, delicate, the kind of precision that would challenge machines built 1,800 years later. They stare, suspended in the water, barely moving. The sea sways around them, as if curious. The lead diver signals to begin the ascent. He slides the artifact gently into a specially padded retrieval cradle, a kind of underwater stretcher designed for ancient ceramics and delicate materials. But even this feels inadequate. The bronze object seems heavier than its mass, as if the weight of an entire civilization hides inside it. As they begin the slow rise, the water shifts again. Fish scatter around them, swirling away like startled birds. Tiny bubbles trail upward, catching light from the submersible lamps in shimmering chains. The artifact ascends with them. In the shifting beams of their lights, the internal gears glint faintly, like the eyes of something waking up. None of the divers speak for several minutes. But inside their helmets, their minds race. What kind of ancient device had gears? What purpose did it serve? How could it have survived this long, hidden beneath the waves? And why does it feel almost intentional that they found it now? The surface begins to appear as a diffuse brightness above them, blurring like a distant dream. Their ascent slows for decompression stops. They hover together in a tight cluster, tethered to the ascent line, floating in silence with the artifact suspended between them. In the water's stillness, the device seems to pulse with meaning. The lead diver finally breaks the quiet. "I'm telling you, this is something big." Another breath crackles over the comm. "Yeah, feels like it. I mean, bigger than us." They all know he's right. Not because they understand what the device is. They don't. Not yet. But because sometimes, even before a discovery reveals its purpose, it reveals its gravity. And this one feels like gravity bending. They continue to rise. At the final decompression stop, a sliver of the afternoon sun pierces the water in pale golden streaks. The artifact glistens under the light, revealing a little more of its internal structure. One diver notices another gear, smaller, tucked behind the first. Another sees markings etched faintly around the circular frame. Not random scratches, symbols, divisions, measurements. "Are you seeing this?" "Yeah, those look like astronomical markers." "No, they can't be." "Look again." They do. They cannot deny what they see. Numbers, lines, segments. A precision that should not exist. Not on something this old. Not at this depth. Not in this era of history. The last minutes of the ascent feel electric. As they break the surface, the world explodes into sunlight and sound. The waves slap against the hull of the research vessel. Hands reach out. Voices yell instructions. The artifact is hoisted aboard with extreme care. Salt water streams across the deck, pooling beneath the cradle. The divers climb out one by one, hauling their gear, collapsing helmets, blinking against the brightness. But none of them look away from the artifact. Even as they strip off their tanks and disconnect hoses, their eyes keep drifting back to it. Because now that they in the open air, now that they can see it more clearly, the truth becomes harder to rationalize away. Inside the bronze crust, inside the shell of what once looked like a meaningless chunk of metal, are wheels, discs, cogs, differential gearing, and all of it arranged with a level of sophistication no one has ever attributed to the ancient world. One archaeologist on deck leans in, wiping a streak of seawater from her glasses. Her voice trembles slightly. Is this real? She doesn't expect an answer. Another researcher circles it slowly, mouth slightly open. It can't be. It shouldn't be. He crouches, adjusting his angle to peer into a crack. And yet, the object sits silently. Water drips from it in tiny rhythmic taps, like the slow ticking of a clock. A clock that hasn't moved in 2,000 years. But the gears inside, it look ready, waiting, almost eager to turn again. Someone whispers, "What did we just bring up?" No one answers. Because deep down, in the quiet, instinctive part of the human mind that recognizes all along before reason catches up, they all know. This is not just an artifact, not just a relic, not just a piece of history. This is a rupture, a fracture line running straight from the ancient world into the modern one. A message carved in metal, a whisper across the centuries. And it is about to change everything. When the artifact finally reaches the conservation laboratory, the drama of the sea is replaced by the clinical brightness of LEDs, the smell of solvents, and the silent hum of analytical machines. The water is drained from its container. The bronze creaks faintly as it meets air, like an old bone remembering movement. Technicians in nitrile gloves carefully position the object on a padded titanium frame, locking it in place with micrometric clamps. Cameras shutter, data logs begin. And then, for the first time in 2,000 years, a beam of radiation passes through it. The first X-ray image appears on screen with a slow, ghostly fade. Nobody speaks. Inside the corroded mass, the structure reveals itself like a secret refusing to stay buried. A lattice of interlocking gears, some large, some astonishingly small, arranged not randomly, but with mathematical precision. Their teeth are triangular, consistent, and cut at angles that suggest deliberate calibration. A few gears turn out to be compounded, two wheels sharing a single axis but rotating at different speeds. This is differential gearing, the kind used in astronomical calculators, clocks, and complex mechanical computers. But there's more. A tomography scan begins rotating the internal model in 3 dimensions, and the room collectively leans forward. The screen shows coaxial gear trains, wheels stacked in tight vertical alignment, and epicyclic gearing, with smaller gears orbiting larger ones in perfect ratios. This is not the rough engineering of ancient mills or rudimentary winches. This is precision micromechanics. One engineer zooms in on a specific gear. This tooth spacing, she murmurs. She enlarges it further. These tolerances are ridiculous, and they are. Some clearances between components are less than half a millimeter, a level of precision identical to Renaissance clocks, created by watchmakers with steel tools, lathes, and centuries of accumulated metallurgy. But this device predates those inventions by well over a millennium. A materials specialist points at another cross-section. That bearing surface look here, see that? That's intentional axial relief. Someone designed this to reduce friction over long periods. Another points at the inscriptions recovered by multispectral imaging. The angular divisions these are decorative. They're mathematically derived. Someone encoded astronomical cycles into this. A physicist enters the room, summoned by text message. You need to see this. She stares at the tomography model, then crosses her arms. This is impossible, she says quietly. But the machine turns, and the gears inside turn with it, and no one in the room can maintain disbelief. The artifact is not a decorative object, not a ritual item, not an accident of corrosion. It is a mechanism, a machine. Inside the rusted bronze shell is something that resembles a mechanical computer. And now comes the part the historians fear saying aloud. Nothing like this should exist in the ancient world. Technological timelines bend and twist, but they do not jump. Human knowledge accumulates gradually, with each generation adding a layer to the last. But here inside this sunken device, there is a sudden vertical spike, a discontinuity, a leap. The Antikythera Mechanism demonstrates complex gear ratios used to predict astronomical positions. It implements lunar cycles, solar calendars, planetary motions, all encoded in metal with a sophistication no Greek workshop should have been capable of producing in the 1st century BCE. The Greeks had mathematics, yes. They had geometry, trigonometry, models of celestial spheres. But machining? Precision gear cutting? Metalworking accurate enough to produce meshing differential trains? Those don't appear in history again until the late 14th century. Some aspects, epicyclic gearing, coaxial stacks, only show up in Renaissance engineering 1,600 years after this device was built. The room grows still once this realization settles. If history is a staircase, the Antikythera Mechanism is a missing flight of steps, a jump from the 1st floor to the 10th, with no sign of the intermediate floors. It is not just a puzzle. It is a fracture line in the evolution of technology. A message in bronze gears. A reminder that human genius does not always follow the paths we expect. And for the scientists standing around the glowing tomography screen, the conclusion becomes inescapable. What they are seeing should not exist, and yet it does. Walk with me now, away from the salt of the Aegean and into a different kind of silence, the dry, electrical hush of the Mesopotamian desert. Here, the air tastes of dust and clay. The sun bleaches the world into monochrome. And beneath this ancient soil lies an object so unassuming, so plain, that for decades it was dismissed as nothing more than pottery. A small jar, a copper cylinder, an iron rod. No gears, no inscriptions, no artistry to suggest genius. But as every forensic investigator knows, simplicity can be a disguise. The story begins in 1936, when archaeologists excavating a Parthian settlement near modern-day Baghdad uncovered a collection of humble clay vessels. Each jar was roughly the size of a human hand. Some had asphalt sealing their tops. Inside, a rolled sheet of copper formed a tight cylinder, and through its center, as if claiming a throne, sat a single iron rod. No one paid much attention at first. It looked like a container, a storage piece, something mundane, until one researcher, staring at the alignment of the metals, said the words that would forever change its place in history. "This looks like a galvanic cell." Suddenly, the jar was no longer a relic. It was a device, a machine, a battery. To test the hypothesis, conservators filled replicas of the jar with a mild acid, vinegar, lemon juice, fermented grape juice, any liquid that would dissociate and carry charge. The results were small, but undeniable. A measurable voltage emerged across the copper and iron. A spark born from clay. Not much, perhaps 0.5 to 1 volt per jar, but electricity nonetheless. And here lies the paradox. Electricity should not exist in the ancient world. Not in any practical form, not in any technological paradigm. Yet the desert quietly insists otherwise. Imagine a Mesopotamian craftsman holding this jar, unaware that future civilizations would name the principles involved electrochemistry. He would know only that combining these materials produced a sensation, a tingling shock, a soft spark, a kind of invisible fire, something that felt alive. What would he do with such power? Modern speculation offers 3 possibilities, each stranger and more plausible than the last. Possibility 1, electroplating. The Parthians prized gold, but gold was expensive. By connecting a precious metal solution to the battery and using the iron rod as a cathode, artisans could deposit a thin layer of gold onto silver or bronze objects. This technique would produce jewelry that looked fully gilded while using only a fraction of the material. Recent microscopic analyses of certain artifacts suggest surface layers far too thin to have been applied by hammering or melting. Electrolytic gilding fits the pattern astonishingly well. Possibility 2, medical use. Electric fish, such as the Nile catfish or Mediterranean torpedo rays, were used by ancient physicians for pain relief. The idea that a jar that produces a sting could be applied to sore joints, inflamed tissue, or specific nerves is not implausible. A sealed battery capable of producing a mild shock might have been seen as a therapeutic tool, a miracle jar that held the desert's lightning. Possibility 3, a philosophical novelty. Perhaps they didn't know what to do with it, but they knew it was interesting. Ancient civilizations were not strangers to experimentation. Just as Greek philosophers played with steam jets, lenses, magnets, and mechanical toys, the Parthians may have created a crude electrical device simply because they could. Because curiosity is older than history. And then there is the most uncomfortable possibility of all. The device had a use we have not yet rediscovered. One jar is a curiosity. A dozen jars are a pattern. Nearly 30 have been found. Enough to suggest intentional production. Enough to propose a workshop, perhaps even a specialist. A master of jars. A desert electrician whose name has vanished beneath the sands. The deeper question, however, does not concern what the battery did. It concerns what it means. Because electricity, even in this humble form, implies experimentation with forces that official timelines place 2,000 years in the future. A spark in the desert. A signal, faint but undeniable, that technological intuition has no respect for chronology. When this jar sits on a museum shelf, it looks unremarkable. But on a laboratory bench, connected to electrodes and filled with lemon juice, it glows with quiet defiance. A clay vessel whispering across millennia. We understood more than you think, and in the vast hall of the Museum of Anomalies we are building together, this humble jar stands not as an outlier, but as a reminder that genius can bloom anywhere, even in the simplest of containers. Our next anomaly does not rest beneath oceans or deserts. It stands in plain sight, towering above the sands. The monuments of ancient Egypt: granite, diorite, quartzite, stone so hard that even modern steel tools groan against it. And yet, scattered among these monuments lie clues far more confounding than the pyramids themselves. Not the structures, but the scars. Not the temples, but the cuts. To examine them, we must travel back to 1881, when a meticulous English archaeologist named Sir Flinders Petrie began documenting what most explorers ignored: the tool marks. Petrie was not easily impressed. He had seen ruins across continents. He was known for his precision, his near-obsessive habit of measuring every angle, every groove, every irregularity. But in Egypt, among the rubble of ancient quarries and unfinished statues, he found something that stopped him cold. A cylinder of granite, perfectly bored, smooth, symmetrical, and carved with a spiral groove so deep and so mathematically consistent that it seemed impossible. This relic would later be called Granite Core Number 7, one of the most controversial artifacts in the history of archaeology. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than a stone tube. But Petrie did not rely on glances. He relied on geometry, measurement, and the cold logic of engineering. What he discovered was astonishing. The spiral groove carved into the granite indicated that the drill used to cut it advanced into the stone at a rate of 1/10 of an inch per revolution. Let's pause and appreciate what that means. Granite is one of the hardest natural materials available. Modern stone drilling tools, using high-speed rotary diamond bits, industrial presses, and electric motors, often achieve penetration rates far lower than this. Yet here was a piece of granite suggesting that some ancient tool pushed downward with such force, such stability, and such abrasive power that it removed material like butter under a hot blade. Petrie knew the standard explanation. Egyptians used copper chisels, wooden drills, sand abrasives, and manpower. But copper is soft, far too soft to bite into granite at that rate. Even using quartz sand as an abrasive, the copper would deform, melt, or tear long before producing such a consistent spiral. So Petrie asked a simple, devastating question. What kind of tool leaves a mark like this? He examined the grooves under magnification. He studied their pitch, their spacing, their depth, and he reached a conclusion that no one wanted to hear. The drill that cut this core behaved as if it were weighted with enormous downward pressure, perhaps hundreds of pounds, and rotated with precision far beyond hand tools. He wrote in his 1883 report, "The rate of spiral varies, but in one instance it ascends at a rate of 1/10 inch per revolution, a feat that modern engineers cannot replicate with any known hand tools." This was not a wild claim. It was geometry. It was measurement. It was the impartial testimony of stone. Some mechanism, some tool, some unknown industrial process, drilled into the granite with a speed and efficiency that defies the conventional timeline of technological development. The implications are difficult to ignore. If hand tools cannot achieve this rate, and copper drills cannot survive this pressure, and the spiral is too perfect for brute force alone, then the ancient Egyptians possessed either a technology we have lost or a technique we have never understood. The deeper you stare into core number 7, the more impossible it becomes. Imagine the tool that made it, a rotating drill head, perhaps weighted, perhaps using an abrasive slurry more advanced than simple sand, perhaps using quartz-infused bronze alloys we have yet to rediscover. Or perhaps, and this is the most haunting possibility, a mechanical drill powered by a system no longer present in the archaeological record, a workshop that vanished, a craft that evaporated, a knowledge that slipped through the cracks of time. In the Museum of Anomalies, granite core number 7 sits quietly under glass, but it radiates a silent accusation. Or, your story of the past is incomplete, and as we stand before it, tracing the impossible spiral with our eyes, we realize that this small tube of stone may be more technologically provocative than any pyramid. To ground ourselves after the enigmas of lost machines and forgotten engineering, we turn now to something far more intimate than a drill core or a rusted gear. An object you could hold in your hands. An object small enough to sit on a dinner table, yet powerful enough to rewrite what we know about ancient science. It is called the Lycurgus cup. At first glance, it is simply a Roman chalice, crafted in the 4th century AD. A cup meant to hold wine, to pass between friends, to catch the flicker of oil lamps in a quiet banquet hall. It is made of glass, shaped into a delicate cage of vines and figures, telling the myth of King Lycurgus, entangled by the god Dionysus. But the Romans, perhaps unknowingly, had created something far beyond decoration. Something so advanced, so scientifically precise, that it would not be understood for 1,600 years. For the magic of the Lycurgus cup is revealed when you expose it to light. Hold it in your hands and illuminate it from the front, and the glass gleams a deep, lustrous green rich like emerald, cool like shaded forest leaves. But move the light behind it. Let the glow pass through the glass instead of across it, and the cup transforms. It turns ruby red, not faintly, not subtly, but with the full, intense brilliance of liquid fire. To ancient eyes, this must have appeared supernatural. A cup that changes color, not by paint or dye, but by the very light itself. For centuries, scholars admired it, puzzled over it, marveled at this strange duality. They assumed it was an accident of impurities, a trick of shadows, a quirk of ancient glassmaking. But in the 1990s, using electron microscopy, scientists finally uncovered the truth. The Lycurgus cup is infused with nanoparticles of gold and silver. Let that word settle for a moment. Nanoparticles, particles so small around, 50 nanometers, that they are 1,000 times smaller than a grain of salt. At this scale, metals behave not like solids, but like quantum structures. They interact with light in ways entirely different from their macro-sized counterparts. In modern laboratories, this effect is called plasmon resonance, a phenomenon where tiny metal particles absorb and scatter specific wavelengths of light, creating dramatic color shifts. Today, this principle is used in chemical sensors, medical diagnostics, even cutting-edge photonic devices. Yet here it is, in a Roman wine cup, made by artisans 17 centuries before the word nanotechnology was coined. The discovery stunned scientists, because these nanoparticles are not the result of accidental contamination. Their distribution is too uniform. The ratio of gold to silver too deliberate. The optical effect too precise. This was engineered, intentionally. Someone, some workshop, some forgotten guild understood how to grind precious metals down to the nanoscale and suspend them perfectly within molten glass, crafting an object that behaves like a modern optical device. And this raises a profound question. How much did the Romans know? Did they understand the underlying physics? Did they track the behavior of light through metal-infused glass? Did they experiment with portions, compositions, firing temperatures until the cup glowed at their command? Or was this the legacy of an older technique, passed from master to apprentice, slowly losing its rationale but preserving its power? Whatever the truth, the implications are startling. This cup uses controlled nanotechnology. It reflects a level of material science not rediscovered until the 20th century. And it reminds us, brutally and beautifully, that ancient societies were capable of extraordinary sophistication. Because this is not a one-of-a-kind miracle. It is the survivor of what was likely a broader tradition, an entire lineage of artisans who mastered a branch of physics we assumed was modern. Imagine the workshop where it was made. Molten glass glowing like captured stars, metal powders mixed with the patience of alchemists, craftsmen peering into furnaces with eyes trained to read color the way scholars read books. This was not primitive. This was mastery. And as you watch the cup shift from green to red, as if holding both forest and flame inside its skin, you realize something profound. The past did not lack intelligence. It lacked continuity. Knowledge shines, then vanishes. Techniques flourish, then fall silent. Entire sciences bloom, then collapse into dust. The Lycurgus cup is not a relic of magic. It is a relic of a scientific tradition erased by time. It anchors us back in reality, not a fantasy of lost civilizations or alien intervention, but the far more human truth. Genius is not linear. Genius is fragile. And history remembers only the survivors. Imagine a blade so sharp that a single stroke can slice through floating silk. Not pulled silk, not taut silk, silk drifting in the air. No modern factory steel has ever demonstrated that trick. No stainless formulation, no powdered metallurgy, no vacuum-forged alloy. And yet, over 1,000 years ago, somewhere between India, Persia, and the workshops of the Levant, smiths were producing swords that behaved like magic. We call it Damascus steel, though the name is misleading. Damascus was a trading hub, not the origin. The real technique, the true method, lived in the hands of metallurgists who used Wootz ingots from ancient India. And whatever they knew, we no longer do. The mystery begins with the pattern. Flowing waves, swirling like wood grain or fingerprints. These lines aren't decorative. They are the physical manifestation of a metallurgical secret, a dance between carbon and iron that modern researchers still struggle to reproduce. When crusaders encountered these blades, they recorded that the metal could bend without breaking, then snap back with perfect elasticity. It could cut European swords in half. It could retain an edge for months. These descriptions sound like exaggeration, but they appear again and again in independent chronicles. So the question becomes, what were the ancient smiths doing that the modern world can't? For decades, researchers assumed the answer was simply carbon content. High carbon steel can be strong and sharp, after all. But high carbon steel is also brittle, very brittle. Yet Damascus blades were not. Something was holding the structure together. Then the microscopes improved, and that's when everything changed. Under high-resolution imaging, metallurgists discovered something no one expected to find inside an object forged over 1,000 years ago: nanostructures. Actual nanotubes of carbon and nanowires intricately embedded in the metal matrix. To be clear, these are features we associate with modern material science. Electron microscopes, clean labs, precision-controlled furnaces, nanotechnology, not with charcoal forges, clay crucibles, and hand-operated bellows. The Damascus smiths didn't know the word nanotube, of course. But whatever process they used, the specific mix of minerals in the ore, the botanical compounds in their flux, the temperature cycling, the precise rhythm of heating and quenching, accidentally created nanoscale reinforcement far beyond what anyone in the modern world believed possible for the era. Those structures act like springs and bridges inside the metal. They distribute stress. They stabilize the lattice. They prevent cracks from spreading. They sharpen without chipping. They turn the blade into something alive, responsive, flexible, and, in many ways, superior to industrial steel. The tragedy is that the recipe vanished. We have clues, yes. Wootz ingots show traces of vanadium, chromium, tungsten, and carbon structures that only appear when the material is heated and cooled in a very specific thermodynamic sequence. But no one today has managed to fully replicate the combination of strength, elasticity, sharpness, and microscopic architecture of the originals. We can get close. But close is not Damascus. What we've lost is not just a craft, but a technology, one that relied on a hidden interplay of chemistry, metallurgy, and thermal cycling that exceeded the expectations of its historical context. A technique whose fingerprint appears only under electron microscopy and whose performance rivals, or surpasses, the results of billion-dollar industrial methods. This is the second signature in our pattern. An advanced phenomenon, in this case, nanostructured metallurgy, appearing centuries, perhaps millennia, before it should exist. Across these case studies, the suspended atom of the dendrolite, the nanotube reinforced Damascus blade, one pattern emerges, brilliance appears, burns bright, and then disappears, sometimes for centuries. These artifacts don't point to aliens, lost continents, time travelers, or secret civilizations. They point to us, because what makes them extraordinary is not their impossibility, it's their impermanence. Human ingenuity is not a straight line. It spikes, it collapses, it redistributes. A breakthrough can be born in a tiny workshop surrounded by desert, or on a riverbank forge in ancient India, or in a stone temple lit by oil lamps. And then, through war, famine, migration, or simple disinterest, that knowledge can vanish. Entire technologies can slip into the cracks of history, leaving behind only mysterious footprints. The Antikythera Mechanism wasn't too advanced. We were too quick to forget the path that led to it. The Damascus blade wasn't impossibly modern. Modernity simply failed to preserve the recipe. What these artifacts teach us is not that ancient people were visited by outsiders, but that human beings themselves are capable of achieving extraordinary things, even without the scaffolding of industrial science, and equally capable of losing them. Genius is fragile. Techniques are mortal. Civilizations don't move in a staircase, they move in waves. And those waves, at their peaks, produce wonders. Before we continue the investigation, take a moment to anchor yourself in this idea. Technology is not a timeline, it has a memory. And memory fades. If you've been surprised so far, if these forgotten leaps of brilliance shifted the way you see history, then pause for half a second and tap the follow button or save this video. Not for me, but so that you don't forget what humanity once achieved and what it might achieve again. Imagine a world that is familiar, yet fundamentally different. A world whose history runs parallel to ours, but veers subtly and decisively down another path. Not a fantastical realm of dragons and myth, not a futuristic alternate Earth, but our own antiquity shifted by a single human realization. A moment when someone, somewhere, looked at an artifact and saw not a curiosity, but a revolution. We begin with the device that could have triggered it. In the 1st century AD, in the bustling, brilliant city of Alexandria, Hero stands before his creation, a bronze sphere, hollow, mounted on pivots, fed by a boiler heated underneath. Steam rushes in, escapes from angled nozzles, and the sphere begins to spin. The Eolipile. Today, we learn about it in history books as a footnote, a scientific toy demonstrating the principles of reactive motion. Hero himself treated it as entertainment, an intellectual flourish, a clever trick to amuse guests during temple rituals. It was a novelty, a demonstration, a dead end. But now, imagine Hero pauses, just for a moment, and sees what no one else does. Imagine he recognizes the potential contained in that Turing sphere. Heat becomes motion, motion becomes power, power becomes industry. This is where the divergence begins. Let us rewrite the past from this single pivot point. We imagine Hero presenting his device not as a curiosity, but as a proposal. Perhaps he brings it to a wealthy patron in Alexandria, a merchant dealing in grain ships, a politician seeking military advantage, an engineer hungry for recognition. He demonstrates the spinning sphere. He explains its principles. He imagines something larger, a machine not just to entertain, but to work. Now imagine the patron listens. Imagine he funds it. Imagine Hero is given apprentices, tools, medals, access to the vast intellectual machine of Alexandria, a city that housed the greatest library of the ancient world. A library containing treatises on mathematics, hydraulics, pneumatics, and mechanics. The knowledge was there. The materials were there. The artisans were there. All that was missing was intention. So now we give the ancient world that intention. Within a generation, the toy is scaled. Boilers become larger. Bronze spheres become cylinders. Primitive pistons are hammered into shape. The tolerances are imperfect. The seals leak. The metal warps, but the device works. A crude engine wheezes, sputters, and then drives a turning shaft. Artisans gather around it in disbelief. Some recoil in fear. Others feel awe. For the first time in history, mechanical work is separated from muscle, wind, and water. It is a small miracle. It is the birth of a new antiquity. Now picture Alexandria a century later. Walk through its workshops. Hear the clatter of bronze gears being filed. Smell the smoke from furnaces, fueled not only by wood, but by early coal imported from the fringes of the empire. Listen to the rhythmic pulse of pistons driving water pumps in the shipyards. The air is tinged with steam. The walls tremble with motion. This is no sleek Victorian industrial age. It is rough, chaotic, improvised. Metal bangs on metal. Leather valves hiss. Boilers groan. But it is real. It works. And from these primitive machines, the ancient world begins to accelerate. Imagine Roman grain mills powered by steam instead of rivers. Mines drained by mechanical pumps, allowing deeper excavation of copper, tin, and iron. Workshops equipped with rotary tools, making gear production faster and more consistent. Suddenly, devices like the Antikythera Mechanism, once the result of astonishing individual genius, can be mass-produced. In our world, no machine like it appears for 1,500 years. In this alternate world, it becomes common. A sailor navigating the Mediterranean doesn't rely solely on stars and experience. He carries a bronze orrery calibrated for his journey. Eclipse prediction becomes not a mystical art, but a standardized tool. Ports communicate via scheduled signals. Fleets move with precision. The Mediterranean becomes clockwork. Trade intensifies. Exploration expands. Cultures blend. The world shrinks centuries ahead of schedule. Now we step into Rome itself. Stand on a hill outside the city at sunrise. The first light hits the domes, the tiled roofs, the temples, the aqueducts, arching gracefully across the landscape. But today, a new sound joins the city's chorus. A hiss, a clatter, a rhythmic pulse. Down by a warehouse near the Tiber, a steam engine drives a mechanical winch. Crates are lifted along a ramp without the straining of 20 men pulling ropes. Workers watch with astonishment. A few cross themselves. A few cheer. A few whisper that it is unnatural. But the machine keeps working, tireless, indifferent, obedient. Rome begins to change. Imagine steam carts rattling down Roman roads, already so straight, so smooth, so meticulously engineered that they seem designed centuries ahead of their time. Small locomotives carrying soldiers to distant borders. Fire pumps capable of saving whole districts. Mechanized cranes building larger ships, larger fortifications, larger dreams. War changes. Travel changes. Economies shift. And with every advance, the demand for metal increases. More mining, more refining, more precision. Soon, workshops create specialized lathes powered by steam rotors. Bronze gears become cheaper. Iron tools become stronger. Devices once unthinkable become inevitable. Automation begins not in the 18th century, but in the second. Now imagine the sensory immersion of this world. Walk into a steam workshop near the Colosseum. The air is thick with vapor. Bronze pipes drip with condensation. Artisans shout over the roar of a boiler. A metal wheel spins too fast, the blur of its motion mesmerizing. The floor vibrates with mechanical pulse. This is not modern industry. This is ancient industry raw, improvised, dangerous. Tools are not standardized. Metals crack under stress. Accidents are common. Leather seals degrade quickly. Boilers overpressurize and burst. But progress continues. Because humanity, once it glimpses power, never lets go. Now imagine the cultural and intellectual world shaped by this steampunk antiquity. Philosophers debate the meaning of mechanical motion. Mathematicians refine calculus centuries early. Astronomers build orreries so precise they rival Renaissance instruments. Doctors invent new tools for surgery. Architects design buildings reinforced by steam-driven lifts and hoists. Art changes, literature changes, religion changes. Imagine Roman myths reinterpreted through the lens of machinery. Imagine temples decorated with kinetic sculptures powered by hidden boilers. Imagine mystery cults interpreting steam as breath, as soul, as divine force. And in the Library of Alexandria still standing, never-burned scholars collect treatises on mechanics, thermodynamics, material science. The library becomes not only a repository of knowledge, but a laboratory of innovation. A scientific revolution begins 1,000 years early. Now consider how this affects global exploration. With mass-produced navigational gears, steam-assisted ships, and more reliable maps, Rome discovers the Indian Ocean not through sporadic trade, but through deliberate expansion. Steam-powered bilge pumps allow deeper, broader hulls. Ships become more stable. Voyages become safer. Rome reaches sub-Saharan Africa with regularity. Rome builds permanent trading posts in India. Rome circles Arabia. Rome hears rumors of China and begins sending expeditions. Globalization begins early. Cultures interlock. Ideas merge. Technologies blend. Gunpowder appears centuries sooner. Steel production accelerates. Astronomy leaps forward. The world stands on the edge of a scientific age long before the fall of Rome. Because in this alternate timeline, Rome does not collapse. It industrializes. The Western world does not enter 1,000 years of technological stagnation. Instead, it enters 1,000 years of exponential growth. By the time the Middle Ages would have arrived in our world, this alternate Rome may already have built steam-powered clocks, mechanical calculators, even primitive scientific instruments capable of detecting atmospheric pressure or tracking magnetic variations. The leap to electricity becomes thinkable. The leap to internal combustion becomes plausible. The leap to steam rockets small, experimental, symbolic, becomes a matter of time. And so we arrive at the final image of this reconstructed antiquity, a world that could have reached the stars 1,000 years ago. Not through magic, not through fantasy, but through a single realistic shift in human curiosity. Hero looks at his spinning toy and sees a machine. What if the ancient world stood on the edge of an industrial revolution and then stepped back? That is the uncomfortable question lurking behind every gear, every drill core, every anomalous artifact we've examined so far. Because if all the necessary ingredients were present mathematical sophistication, metalworking skill, curiosity, experimentation, then we must confront an even stranger possibility. Civilizational progress is not guaranteed. It is reversible. It is fragile. This is where the dream of a steam-powered antiquity collides with the brutal reality of history. Advanced technology does not die with a spectacular explosion. It dies quietly. A gear can be melted. A workshop can be abandoned. A specialist can die with their knowledge unrecorded. The Antikythera Mechanism contains about 40 bronze gears. Bronze is an alloy of copper, and tin, two metals incredibly valuable in the ancient world. If you melt those gears, you can produce arrowheads, helmets, armor plates, or tools. And unlike a mechanism that only navigators or astronomers understand, a weapon has universal value. The same is true for iron. The Baghdad Battery's simplicity is its weakness. A clay jar, a copper cylinder, an iron rod. Nothing about it demands preservation. In a world where materials are scarce and war is constant, high technology is not simply vulnerable, it is consumable. Imagine a workshop in Rhodes that once produced geared astronomical devices. Now imagine a single generation later. Famine, invasion, political upheaval. The gears become scrap. The diagrams are erased. The master craftsman dies. And just like that, the lineage of innovation snaps. The brilliance doesn't vanish because it failed. It vanishes because it didn't matter enough at the time. Complex societies generate wonders: mathematics, engineering, bureaucracy, science. But those same societies depend on delicate interlocking systems, trade networks, literacy, skilled artisans, political stability, surplus food, centralized governance. Break any one of those, and the whole structure falls. You cannot mass-produce an Antikythera mechanism without tin imports from modern-day Afghanistan, copper from Cyprus, Greek mathematical tradition, literate specialists, workshops with precision tools, wealthy patrons who value long-term navigation, stable sea routes, an educated elite who think astronomy matters. Remove even one of these, and the system collapses back into simplicity. This is the trap. High technology is a pyramid of dependencies. Low technology is a flat plane. It needs nothing but human hands and stone. A hand axe survives millennia. A differential gear drowns in the sea and is lost for 2,000 years. Let's imagine the historical timeline from another angle. 1. Political instability. The ancient Mediterranean was a carousel of conquests, betrayals, revolts, civil wars, and invasions. The Romans may have been powerful, but they were not stable. Emperors were assassinated annually. Economies collapsed. Provinces rebelled. Armies marched constantly. Instability kills innovation by redirecting talent. A skilled metalworker becomes a weaponsmith, not a clockmaker. A mathematician becomes a tax accountant. A philosopher becomes a propagandist. A library becomes a barracks. Complex creativity withers under the boot of survival. 2. Economic priorities. An industrial revolution demands a specific incentive structure, the need to produce more, faster, cheaper. But ancient economies were not built on efficiency. They were built on slave labor. A steam engine that performs the work of 30 men is revolutionary only if those 30 men cost money. But if they are slaves, if their labor is essentially free, the incentive to mechanize evaporates. Hero of Alexandria's inventions were marvels, toys for aristocrats, curiosities for temples, not solutions to economic pressure. The ancient world never reached the tipping point where machines needed to replace human labor. And without economic pressure, innovation remains a luxury, not a necessity. 3. Knowledge transmission was brittle. Most ancient scientific knowledge was stored in papyrus scrolls, wooden tablets, oral traditions, personal notebooks, marginalia, comments on earlier texts, all extremely vulnerable to fire, moisture, insects, war, neglect, political purges, accidental loss. Libraries burned so often in the ancient world that we romanticize a few famous ones. The Library of Alexandria, the Library of Pergamon, but the truth is far more devastating. The average city fire destroyed more scientific knowledge than all major library fires combined. What survives to us is a sliver, a ghost of a ghost. If one workshop in Rhodes knew how to cut precision gears, and that workshop vanished, the knowledge died with it. 4. Innovation was not a cultural value. We live in a world where New equals better. But that mindset is historically rare. Ancient cultures valued tradition, continuity, divine order, inherited methods, ancestral knowledge. Innovation was often viewed with suspicion or irrelevance. The question was not, what can we invent? But what did the ancestors instruct? In Egypt, some stoneworking techniques seem to have been lost and rediscovered multiple times across dynasties. This is what happens when innovation isn't central to cultural identity. It flickers in and out of existence. 5. Catastrophe resets the clock. Rome fell. Trade collapsed. Literacy plummeted. Cultural fragmentation spread. Political power decentralized. The Dark Ages were not a single event. They were a slow erosion. The world shrank. Complexity retreated. The pyramid inverted. What was once global became local. What was once advanced became irrelevant. And when society collapses to a certain point, technological sophistication becomes not only unattainable, but unnecessary. You cannot build an Antikythera mechanism in a world where no one travels beyond 50 kilometers. No one needs planetary calendars. No one funds scientific research. No one imports tin. No one can read Greek mathematical texts. Civilization regressed, not because humans became less intelligent, but because the world lost the scaffolding that made complexity possible. Here is the paradox. The more advanced a technology is, the more perishable it becomes. A smartphone becomes worthless in 10 years. A steel sword lasts a few centuries. A bronze axe lasts 1,000 years. A stone tool lasts forever. In the ruins of cities, the simplest objects endure. The most complex objects vanish. This is why prehistoric stone tools outnumber ancient mechanical tools by millions to one. It's not that ancient people didn't create complex devices. It's that complexity is fragile and time is merciless. The Antikythera Mechanism is a miracle not because it existed, but because it survived. How many others dissolved before anyone could see them? Let's return to the alternate world we imagined. In 4A, the steam-powered antiquity, the bronze locomotives, the mechanical computers on marble desks. Now ask, why didn't this happen? Because innovation requires a critical mass of stability, cooperation, wealth, incentives, literacy, curiosity, materials, freedom. Take away Eden 1, and the flame sputters out. In our world, the flame flickered many times in Greece, in China, in India, in the Islamic Golden Age, before finally catching fire in 18th century Europe. The Industrial Revolution wasn't inevitable. It was an accident of circumstances. A cosmic roll of the dice. We think civilization marches forward. But history tells a harsher story. Progress is rare. Stagnation is common. Regression is normal. For every Renaissance, there are 10 collapses. For every Newton, there are 100 forgotten geniuses whose works turn to ash. For every Antikythera mechanism, there are 10,000 melted gears. We live today in an unusually stable and wealthy era. It feels normal to us. But it is the statistical anomaly, the exception to the long, dark, chaotic human story. Most of human existence is spent clawing for survival, not building steam engines. The great trap of complexity is this. The higher a civilization rises, the harder it falls. And the more advanced its technology becomes, the less likely that technology is to endure the collapse. Stone tools survive ice ages. Bronze gears survive shipwrecks. Silicon circuits survive nothing. This is the uncomfortable truth. We look back at the ancient world and see simplicity, not because they lacked brilliance, but because time has erased their complexity. What we call primitive may simply be what survived. We like to imagine ourselves as the apex of human history, the endpoint, the pinnacle, the inevitable result of a long chain of progress climbing upward in a perfect slope. But once you truly understand how fragile advanced technology is, how easily it breaks, how quickly it disappears, how silently it can be erased, you begin to see the modern world in an entirely new light. Because the question that haunts historians, archaeologists, and engineers alike is not just, how did ancient technology arise? But also, how does it disappear? And that question forces us to confront an uncomfortable paradox. Technology is more powerful than anything in history, and also more fragile than anything in history. Take a smartphone, the emblem of our age. It contains processors at nanometer scales, rare earth metals from politically unstable regions, a global supply chain spanning a dozen countries, software layered upon software, cloud infrastructure, energy grids, satellites, manufacturing plants costing billions. It is the most advanced consumer object ever created, and it is also one of the most fragile. In 500 years, every smartphone on Earth will be gone, corroded, shattered, reduced to dust. Nothing will remain but tiny flecks of metal in a landfill. On the other hand, the granite drill cores of Egypt, carved some 4,500 years ago, will still exist. The obsidian blades of the Maya will still exist. The bronze tools of the Asian will still exist. So ask yourself, who leaves a greater archaeological footprint, us or them? Which civilization looks more advanced from the viewpoint of deep time? The one whose knowledge can be wiped out by a power outage? Or the one whose engineering still puzzles us millennia later? We like to think we are different, smarter, more resilient, more permanent. But our world is built on the same kind of fragile complexity that doomed the ancient world as technological breakthroughs. Consider what your life requires to function. Electricity, clean water, internet, logistics networks, semiconductor fabrication, globalized trade, stable governments, diplomatic cooperation, fuel chains, specialized labor, continuous software support. Disrupt any single one of these layers, and the modern world grinds to a halt. We are not living in a robust technological age. We are living in a highly optimized, highly interdependent, extremely brittle one. In this sense, we resemble the ancient world far more than we'd like to admit. The Antikythera Mechanism didn't vanish because people suddenly became ignorant. It vanished because the environment that produced it collapsed. Our technology depends on conditions just as delicate. Imagine a future archaeologist in the year 8000 AD, excavating the ruins of what used to be New York City. What will they find? Not smartphones, not silicon wafers, not microchips, not synthetic polymers. They will find copper pipes, iron tools, concrete foundations, glass, ceramic tiles. In other words, the same kinds of artifacts we find when excavating ancient Rome. So when we look at the past and see primitive objects, we must understand that we're not seeing the full picture. We're seeing only what survived. The ancient world might have created far more intricate devices, but time is biased toward simplicity. The archaeological record does not show the best a civilization could do. It shows the best a civilization could leave behind. And that is a crucial distinction. Imagine two civilizations. Civilization A creates smartphones, nuclear reactors, satellites, advanced electronics. Their devices last 10 to 30 years. Their records exist only in volatile digital formats. Their technology requires rare materials and massive infrastructure. In a collapse, it all disappears in 2 generations. Civilization B creates bronze mechanisms, granite drill cores, obsidian scalpels. Their devices last 5,000 to 10,000 years. Their records survive on stone or baked clay. Their technology uses materials that remain recognizable over millennia. In a collapse, their artifacts outlive everything. Which is the advanced civilization? The one that can reach the moon, but leaves nothing behind? Or the one whose tools last long enough to puzzle people thousands of years later? This is the philosophical knife edge of technological progress. Durability is not proportional to sophistication. Sometimes, The simplest tool survives the longest. Sometimes the most advanced tool leaves no trace at all. The Antikythera Mechanism, the Baghdad Battery, the inexplicable Egyptian drill cores, they aren't evidence of alien civilizations or lost super races. They are evidence of something far more profound. Human brilliance is universal, but its survival is accidental. The reason these artifacts shock us is not because they are impossible, but because they are statistically improbable. Historically, most high technology disappears. Most knowledge evaporates. Most complexity collapses. We almost never get to see the peaks, only the rubble. And this brings us to the central philosophical insight of this segment. We are not the first humans capable of extraordinary innovation. We are only the first humans lucky enough that our innovations coincide with a rare window of global stability. If our era suffered the same disruptions the ancient world endured, mass migrations, hostile invasions, pandemics, trade collapses, political fragmentation, we could lose everything. Not because we are weak, but because complexity is weak. In the long view of history, the Dark Ages are the norm. Technological flourishing is the anomaly. Walk through any archaeological museum and look at the objects behind the glass. Stone blades, pottery, jewelry, coins, weapons, tablets. This is not a record of humanity. This is a record of material survival. What defines a civilization, its ideas, its systems, its ingenuity, is mostly gone. Only the toughest materials endure. So when we look back and judge the ancients based on stone and pottery, we are making a category error. We're judging their intelligence based on what survives decay, not on what they were actually capable of. The Antikythera Mechanism emerged from this darkness like a message in a bottle, reminding us that ancient brilliance existed, and likely existed far more often than we think. How many other inventions were lost because they were made from wood, leather, papyrus, iron, or poor quality bronze? How many breakthroughs are missing simply because the past was not lucky enough to preserve them? Modern society tends to look backward with condescension. We imagine the ancients as fumbling beginners on a long road of progress culminating in us. But this is a distortion caused by time, not truth. If an ancient engineer could walk into one of our laboratories, or we into theirs, we would recognize each other instantly. The curiosity in the eyes, the compulsion to understand, the hunger to build, the joy of solving puzzles, the pride in craftsmanship. The continuity is not technological. It is human. We are not the pinnacle. We are the latest iteration. And like every iteration before us, we are vulnerable to forgetting. In 1,000 years, what will remain of our world? Our skyscrapers will crumble. Our electronics will dissolve. Our databases will vanish. Our satellites will decay from orbit. Our plastics will fragment into invisibility. Our digital history will be irretrievable. What will survive? Probably our stone monuments, our metal cutlery, our ceramics. Artifacts indistinguishable from those of ancient civilizations. So here is the haunting question that closes segment 4. When future archaeologists dig up our ruins, will they see us as the advanced civilization or the forgotten one? Because in the long run, the only evidence of genius is what endures. And sometimes, the simplest objects tell the deepest truths. As we stand here at the threshold of everything we've explored, the gears buried in a shipwreck, the clay jar humming with a forgotten electric charge, a spiral-cut granite core whispering of drills that should not exist, a pattern begins to emerge. Not a conspiracy, not an alien intervention. Something far more human, far more profound, and far more unsettling. A mirror. A mirror held up to our assumptions, our arrogance, our comfortable belief that history is a straight line leading inevitably to us. A mirror reflecting a truth we rarely confront. Human ingenuity is not linear. It is not cumulative. It sparks, it blazes, and it can vanish. Throughout this journey, We've seen three signatures of brilliance scattered across thousands of years and thousands of miles. A mechanical computer capable of predicting the heavens with astonishing precision. A simple yet functional electrochemical device centuries before electricity had a name. Drill marks carved into granite with a force and efficiency we still struggle to replicate. These are not anomalies. They are echoes, the remaining notes of songs that were once entire symphonies. And if we step close enough, if we listen carefully, we realize the silence between them is not emptiness. It is absence. It is what happens when knowledge dies. It is what happens when a civilization, any civilization, loses the structures that allow its brilliance to survive. In this sense, the Antikythera Mechanism is not just an object. It is a message. One that seems to whisper, "You are not as unique as you think." Let us trace our footsteps back through the hall. We began at the bottom of the Aegean Sea, beside a corroded lump of bronze. At first glance, it looked like nothing, a barnacle-covered relic from a ship no one remembered. But inside, hidden beneath rust and time, were the fingerprints of minds as sharp and imaginative as any in the modern world. Tiny teeth carved into gear wheels. A differential mechanism worthy of a Swiss watch. Mathematical elegance trapped in metal. Not magic. Not alien, human. Then we crossed deserts and centuries to a small ceramic jar. Unassuming, fragile, barely noticeable in a museum drawer, that reveals something astonishing when filled with fruit juice or vinegar. Electricity. A gentle spark. A primitive, functional battery capable of plating gold or easing pain with mild electrotherapy. Again, not magic. Not alien, human. And finally, we return to the shadow of the pyramids, where a carved cylinder of granite tells a story many still hesitate to confront. A drill that penetrated stone faster than our copper tools, allow leaving behind spiral grooves that imply rotational forces, abrasives, and engineering we don't fully understand. Still not magic, still not alien, still human. Together, these artifacts form the outline of something we rarely acknowledge. The ancients were capable of far more than we assume, and we underestimate them at our own intellectual peril. So what ties these disparate relics together? What gives them coherence? It isn't technology. It isn't geography. It isn't chronology. It's loss. Each artifact represents a moment where human beings touched the horizon of possibility and then stepped back, not forward. Each one is a point on a graph that rises sharply and then drops to zero, swallowed by war, famine, collapse, or forgetfulness. We think progress is natural, inevitable, guaranteed, but history suggests otherwise. Progress is not a staircase. It is a tightrope. For every age of flourishing, there are countless ages where knowledge evaporates like dew under a rising sun. The Antikythera Mechanism was not followed by computers. The Baghdad Battery was not followed by circuits. The Egyptian drill was not followed by industrialization. These moments did not lead to revolutions. They led to silence. This is perhaps the most humbling truth of all. Humanity has always been brilliant, but brilliance does not always survive. Human. And now, after walking through millennia of forgotten genius, we find ourselves standing in our own age, surrounded by machines, networks, satellites, and systems of staggering complexity. We look around and say, we are the pinnacle. We believe no knowledge will ever be lost again. We assume the trail only leads upward, but the artifacts whisper back. We thought that too. The ancients were not primitive minds fumbling in the dark. They were fully human, just like us, equally creative, equally capable of epiphany, equally vulnerable to destruction. Their technologies did not fail. Their societies did. Their machines did not become obsolete. Their worlds collapsed. Their ideas did not stop mattering. Their infrastructure stopped supporting them. And in this reflection, we see our own fragility. What happens to us, to our knowledge, our systems, our creations, if our own world suffers disruptions? What happens if our libraries burn, our servers lose power, our networks vanish? What happens if the tightrope snaps? History does not reassure us. It warns us everything can be lost. Everything, including us. And so we arrive at the uncomfortable realization that ties the entire journey together. These ancient artifacts are not puzzles to solve. They are warnings. Warnings about what we assume. Warnings about what we take for granted. Warnings about our arrogance. Because every time we react with disbelief, how could they possibly build this? How could they know this? How could they achieve this? We reveal far more about ourselves than about them. We reveal our bias, our lack of imagination, our inability to recognize brilliance unless it wears modern clothing. But the past does not need our permission to be extraordinary. The truth is simple, humbling, and liberating. The ancients were us, with different tools. Not lesser, not simpler, not slower, just earlier. And if their brilliance could vanish overnight, then ours can too. This is the real meaning of the mirror. We are not inherently more advanced than those who came before us. We are simply living in the present. And one day, if the winds of time shift, we too may become a footnote, a shard, a mystery someone else will misunderstand. And so we return to the beginning, to a lump of bronze sleeping under the Aegean Sea, to gears worn smooth by time, to an artifact that should not exist, and yet insists on existing. The Antikythera Mechanism is, in a sense, a rebuke to our assumptions. It tells us that progress is not a straight line, that human genius is not a ladder but a flare, brilliant, momentary, and easily lost in the dark. For centuries, we believed that history was a gradual climb toward sophistication, but every tooth on those ancient gears whispers a different story. That intelligence is not cumulative. That ingenuity is not guaranteed. That the past was capable of reaching heights we no longer know how to measure. Civilizations vanish. Knowledge evaporates. What remains is whatever was lucky enough to survive, and luck is a terrible archivist. We like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of everything that came before. But the mechanism sits in its glass case, like a mirror, angled upward at our face, asking a quiet, uncomfortable question. Are you sure? Are you sure your age is permanent? Are you sure your technologies will endure? Are you sure you are the destination, and not just another step, temporary, contingent, vulnerable? Because the truth is, humanity has always been clever. What we call modern is simply what happened to survive long enough to be built upon. For every breakthrough that reached us, dozens died in silence, erased by fires, floods, invasions, neglect, or simply the slow attrition of centuries. The mechanism forces us to confront a possibility that feels almost taboo. We may not be more advanced. We may simply be the ones who lasted. It invites humility. It demands perspective. It challenges the myth that intelligence moves in one direction, or that complexity is the natural trajectory of civilization. And perhaps this is why the device feels so unsettling. Not because it is alien, but because it is familiar. Because it should not exist, yet it does. Because it reveals that the boundary between ancient and modern is thinner than we want to admit. The great philosophical twist is this. The Antikythera Mechanism does not show that ancient people were like us. It shows that we are still like them, fallible, curious, brilliant, temporary. It shows that across thousands of years, our minds have not changed, only the conditions around them. That genius is a constant in human history, but the worlds that support genius are fragile, fleeting, and astonishingly easy to break. And once broken, they do not repair themselves. They vanish, and their knowledge vanishes with them. So the mechanism becomes a kind of lesson, or perhaps a warning. A reminder that every civilization, including ours, stands on a precipice between what it knows and what it can lose. It is tempting to comfort ourselves by saying, well, We would never forget something like this, but we already have. We forgot it for 2,000 years. And if not for a storm, a shipwreck, and a sponge diver who dove a little too deep, we would still be forgetting. History is not a story of steady progress. It is a story of punctuated brilliance, followed by silence. In that sense, a mechanism is less a window into the ancient world and more a window into our own vulnerabilities. It shows the fragility of knowledge, the impermanence of complexity, and the arrogance of assuming that the present is inevitable. The device is, at its core, a philosophical object, one that invites us to consider not what the ancients were capable of, but what we ourselves are capable of losing. And that is where the emotional weight of this segment lands. If such a thing could appear once and be lost, what else have we lost? What else might we still lose? So now we stand here, in front of the glass case. The lights are dimmer than when we entered. The museum speakers hum softly overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a guard clears his throat, the unmistakable signal that visiting hours are slipping away. But before we leave, the mechanism asks one last thing of us. Not a question about astronomy, or engineering, or lost civilizations. A question about ourselves. Because the story of the Antikythera Mechanism is ultimately not about gears or bronze or vanished knowledge. It is about the delicate thread that ties human beings across millennia. The same curiosity, the same ambition, the same urge to understand the universe and to leave something behind that proves we were here. We look at those tiny interlocking teeth, carved by hands long turned to dust, and we recognize something startling. This is us. This is the human condition rendered in metal. Boldness balanced by fragility. Intelligence shadowed by impermanence. A flash of brilliance suspended over an abyss of forgetting. And suddenly, the museum feels less like a building and more like a time capsule. A vessel where humanity stores the things it hopes will outlive it. But even here, surrounded by glass and climate control and security systems, nothing feels guaranteed. Civilizations are temporary. Ideas are fragile. Knowledge is a flame that must be constantly rekindled. The guard steps a little closer now. A gentle reminder. It's almost closing time. The floor beneath us grows quieter as people drift toward the exits. The great hall empties. The echoes soften. And we remain here, in the hush that settles when a place of learning prepares to sleep. This is the moment when the mechanism reveals its final truth, one that only becomes audible when the world around us grows quiet enough. Everything we build is finite, but the desire to build is infinite. We have always crafted things to make sense of the cosmos. We have always passed knowledge forward, hoping it might survive. We have always tried to pierce the darkness, with bronze gears, with books, with code, with satellites, with the fragile scaffolding of civilization. And every time, the universe is answered with the same silence. But we keep trying, not because we expect permanence, but because creating understanding is part of what makes us human. The guard gives a small, polite nod. It's time. The museum lights dim a little more. We take one last look at the mechanism, not at its complexity, or its beauty, or its impossibility, but at the quiet resolve it represents. The resolve of a species that refuses to let darkness have the last word. As we turn toward the exit, something becomes clear. The mechanism is not an ancient computer. It is an ancient reminder, a reminder of what we are, and what we risk losing, and what we strive to preserve. And as the doors begin to close behind us, we understand that the question is no longer, how did they build it? The question is, will we keep what we have built? The lock clicks softly. The museum settles into its nightly silence. And the mechanism, once again, waits in the dark. Outside, the night has settled fully. The museum doors close behind us with the soft, weathered thud of wood meeting bronze, a sound that feels older than the city itself. The streetlights glow like faint stars. Cars drift past like muted comets. And for a moment, the modern world seemed strangely fragile compared to the ancient one we just left. The Antikythera Mechanism remains inside, asleep behind glass, but its presence lingers with us. In the hum of electricity, in the glow of a screen, in the quiet awareness that everything we consider advanced is just another chapter in a long, fragile story. We walk down the steps, feeling the coolness of the night air on our skin. And now the final thought arrives, gentle but sharp. We are the next forgotten civilization, unless we choose not to be. The mechanism was not built by gods. It was built by hands like ours, imperfect, mortal, imaginative. It proves that genius is not guaranteed to survive. It must be protected, nurtured, renewed. And that is why this story matters. Not because of the gears, not because of the mystery, not even because of the brilliance of the ancients. It matters because it reminds us that progress is not a straight line. It flickers, it collapses, it resurrects. Every generation must decide whether to carry the flame forward or let it fade. We look up at the city lights flickering across the skyline. Somewhere, someone is building something the world will not understand for centuries. Somewhere, someone is discovering an idea that could change everything. Somewhere, someone is crafting tomorrow's Antikythera and may never know it. And as this thought settles, we reach the gentle landing of the journey, a reminder that our greatest technologies are temporary, but our impulse to create is eternal. If the mechanism could speak, perhaps it would say, "Do not marvel at me. Marvel at yourselves, and do not wait for history to remember you. Make something worthy of being remembered." So as we step into the night, here's the final invitation. Look at the world with the eyes of someone who knows how easily brilliance can vanish and create anyway. Protect knowledge, honor curiosity, light the path forward. If this story moved you, if it made you see our own civilization differently, if it reminded you of the fragility and beauty of every idea we hold, subscribe. Come back for the next journey. Help carry the flame forward. Because the museum may close each night, but the questions never do. And neither should we.